Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the week 6 of WTM Ethiopia's mentorship from design to market station. And tonight I'm your host. I am Efradis. I am one of the core team members of WTM, and I'll be hosting this event with my other co-hosts is Eden. And so before we begin, let me just give you a quick rundown of what WTM is, and then we will start. So WTM stands for Women Tech Makers. It's a global initiative by Google that provides visibility, community, and resource for women in technology, and also focuses on creating diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech industry by creating opportunities for women's in different stage of their careers. So tonight we have Ifeoluwa Oluwafemi. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. A backend developer at Dave, and so thank you for joining us. And we're honored to have you here. And the floor is yours. You can continue.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Am I audible? Okay.
You're audible.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna go ahead and present my screen. Hi everyone, welcome to the workshop. I'm just going to go straight ahead to the agenda. So I'm going to give a quick introduction about myself, and then we'll dive right into backend, client server model, Node.js, Express, routing, middleware controllers, APIs, and then we'll get to build our mini backend application, and then QA questions if there are any. But I mean, along the line, if you have questions or you don't get what I'm saying, you could always drop a message in chat box or stop me, right? I'd gladly answer your question. Um, so about me, my name is Ifeoluwa, Ife for short. I'm a backend engineer with 5 years plus working experience. I started coding 2019. I think I did the mathematics wrongly. It's supposed to be 6 years. But yeah, I started coding 2019. I started majorly with Java and Spring Boot. Along the line, due to the fact that I was working with a dev shop, I had to pick up JavaScript, Node.js, and Express, and other databases basically. I've also worked and dabbled across Python and Django framework. Um, I think that's all about me. I'm sort of a boring person. So if you have any question about me, I'm gladly going to answer the question, but really, that's all about me. I'm a software engineer, backend developer to be precise, with success, working experience, basically. So I'm just going to dive right in. Before we go into the workshop proper, I would like us to have a quick conversation about backend, about tech. So the next slide is a question. I would want us in like a minute to just type the answer in the chat box. Um, so what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear backend? In 1 minute, 2 minutes, in the chat box, just drop an answer. What comes to your mind anytime you hear backend? What's the first thing that pops up in your mind when you hear backend? So I'm going to be going through the chat box. Logic, complex logic, Logic. Any other idea? I mean, what comes to your mind? Something definitely comes to. Someone said Chinese language. Something definitely comes to your mind when you hear backend. It's. I mean, Chinese language is not that complicated, but it's not Chinese. Database, strong, storing persistent data. We're all right. We're all right. Is that all? Something mysterious. Wow. It feels like there are a lot of bias about backend on this call, but I'm just going to go back into the workshop. Um, so what's backend? Uh, I want us to think about backend as the invisible engine of the web, right? Is the server side. So when you go to an application, um, for example, LinkedIn, I mean, I feel like that's one common app that we currently use here. If you go to LinkedIn and then you go, you click on post, you type whatever you want to post, and you click on the button post. A lot of things happen at the back in the hood, right? That's backend taking care of it. So I want us to see backend as the invisible side of the web app is the server side. So backend development refers to everything that happens on the server side of a web or mobile application. It is invisible, like I mentioned before. It handles the logic, like you mentioned in chat, database operations, authentications, server configuration, and even external integration that makes the app functional and work, basically. So the major responsibilities of backend in an application is handling requests, data processing, database management, security, and writing APIs, RESTful APIs, and any other APIs that you want to write, basically. So those are like the major responsibilities of backend in a web application. An example of authentication is before you can access your LinkedIn or Instagram or even your mobile app, your bank apps, you need to be signed in. You need to enter your username or password or phone number and password. The authentication on the client side, you're just seeing that you're clicking on the button. But what actually happens in the old, like, does this user actually exist? Has this user been blocked? Have this user been flagged? And those sort of validations happens on the back end. Then if you're good to go, the backend gives a thumbs up. Oh, this user is good to go. Log this user in, and then you're able to access the application. So that's how authentication works on the backend. And database integration. An example of database integration would be, for example, Shein. I don't know if you're familiar with Shein, but Shein is an e-commerce application. So when you're logged into Shein, you get to see a lot of products, right, that you can order from. Those products are coming from a store. They're coming from the DB, basically, the database. So the backend is what's fetching those information from the database, returning it to the front end, which is the client side, and then the client side is rendering it for you to see as a user. So basically, in essence, that's backend. So backend is the server side, is the magic that happens on your web application. I mean, UI wise, client wise, you're just seeing that, oh, I click on this button, this happens. I do this and this happens. But in the hood, what happens in the hood is actually just backend. So backend is the interesting part of coding. Sorry to say. So I'm going to be moving on. Client server model, right? I've been mentioning client and server. For those that still maybe not very familiar with the term, I want us to understand that again, it's just like the examples that I've been given. So let's say you go to an online store, what you are seeing, the products that you're seeing, the categories that you're seeing, that's the client side. But the information, where the information is coming from, is the server side. So I'm going to give an example, a real life example. So you go to an application. You log into an application, right? And then I'm going to use LinkedIn. Again, you go to LinkedIn, you click on the posts, you type whatever you want to type. I don't think that's a valid example. I want to use money as an example. You log into your financial application and you try to send money, right? You've clicked on the amount that you want to send, the account details, and you click on send. The front end or the client side again sends the request to the back end, which is the server side. And then the server side handles, is this transaction pin valid? If it's not valid, it returns an error message. This transaction pin is not valid. Then if it's valid, it goes on. Does this user have enough money in the account? Do you have enough balance? If you don't, it returns a message, insufficient balance. If you have sufficient balance, it goes on and all the validation until it's complete. Then it returns or basically create a transaction, sends the money to whoever you want to send the money to, and send the response back to the client side. The client shows you transaction successful. And then when you go to your transaction history, you now get to see the transaction on your dashboard. Right, that's how the client server works. So it's just like the client sends a request to the backend processes it, sends a response back, the client displays it. It's a circle. Client interacts with the server sends it back, and so on and so forth, basically. So the browser again sends a request to the server receives the request, processes it, and sends back a response. Your browser then displays the results, basically. So in simple terms, the client is what the user interacts with, what the user can see. For example, what I'm displaying, right? The server is what happens behind the scene. So that's the difference between the client and the server. Client is what the user can see. The server is what happens behind the scene, which is the backend, right? Please, if I'm going too fast, you could always draw me back. Or if you have questions, you could raise your hand. So let's jump into the fun part of backend, or one of the fun parts of backend, Node.js and Express. Um, Node.js, I want to believe that, everyone understands JavaScript to a point. Can I get a thumbs up? JavaScript, JavaScript. We're all pros. We're pros, right? So yeah, Node.js. Node.js is a runtime tool. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Node.js is a runtime tool. I like to think of it as an helper for JavaScript. So before Node.js came in, JavaScript could run directly on the browser, on your web browsers like Chrome, Firefox, and whichever browsers you're using, right? But with Node.js, you can run JavaScript outside of your browser, right? You can run it in your command line, on your servers, your IDEs, and whatsoever, right? But without Node.js, right, you could only run JavaScript for backend. You can only run JavaScript for backend on the browser, which is why it's an helper for JavaScript. So Node.js is a tool that allows developers to use JavaScript to write backend code. Node.js allows backend developers to be able to use JavaScript, basically. I think, yeah. In summary, Node.js is an helper JavaScript for backend development. Now let's go to Express. There's a chain. Node.js helps JavaScript. Express helps. The Express is an helper for Node.js. It is a popular framework, right? That makes building server much easier, faster, and more organized, right? With Node.js, you can build your backend applications, no doubt, right? But with Node.js, you get to write a lot of code for very simple functionalities. You write a lot of code for just very simple things. But with Express, since it's a framework, you're able to write simpler codes for simpler functionalities, right? So it's an helper for Node.js in the sense that it helps handles the complex parts of Node.js. Okay, who's raising a hand?
Sorry to interrupt you, but please, Yami, can you mute your mic?
Think the admin can mute.
ከሱም ብሶ አልሰማም በለው አልሰማም በለው የምርህና
Yami,
ከዛስ
can you hear me? Yami Ermias, mute your mic.
ሰው እንደዚህ ሆነ
ለመገጣጠሚያ ማርና ሎሚ መጠጣት ጥሩ ነው፣ እርድ ሳይበዛ።
ከሰው ጋር እደውልልሃለሁ በኋላ እሺ አንተ ለማን እሰይ
ተራከሪኝ ስማገባለ እንደዚህ ያለው ሰው
የሚ ኤርሚያስ
የራሱ መስራት ቀምሳ ይገባል አለች። ምንም ስኳር የሌለውን አንዱን ኪሎ አንድ ኪሎ
ጊዜ እንደማቅሻ ነው ግን የተሰማኝ
አሁን አላልኩም። ያው በራሱ የእሱን ዕቃ እኮ ነው እሱ እንዳይሆን ወሰናቶች ናቸው።
ፍቅር የሆንኩ ልጅ ነኝ
I think I was going. It's like she can't hear you. So Express.js, like I said, it's an helper for Node.js. It's a popular framework that makes building backend servers and more organized. Some of the advantages of Express.js is
የሚገርምሽ ነገር ጸጉር ቤት መጣ በነፃ ስትሰራ ቆይታ መጨረሻ ላይ ሂማን ሻርት ተዋወቀች እሱን አግኝታ ብሳ
can the admin mute host?
እኔ አሜሪካኖች ብዙ ልጅ ይችላል ሂማን ታፎርፍራል ይችላል ሁለተኛዋ ደግሞ አለች ሁለተኛዋ አንተኛ
Yeah. You can speak. I'm going to assume that that was a mistake. So some of the advantages of using Express.js, it's simple. I do not accept. Unmute.
Yami Ermias? Yami Ermias?
Yemi? I think she muted hers. Yeah.
Okay. Some of the advantages of using Express.js is, again, it makes things simpler and minimal. It avoids the bulky codes that you need to write when you're using just pure Node.js. It also supports clean code architecture and structure. You're able to use routes and middlewares. I'm going to go or dive into that in the next slide. But in summary, Node.js lets you run JavaScript outside of the browser. Express.js makes it easier for you to build backend applications using Node.js, right? So together, you are able to create fast, reliable backend applications easy. I mean, it's very easy to actually comprehend when you actually combine Node.js and Express.js together. Um, so we'll be going into the practical part. I don't know if anyone will be following, but if you're going to be following, can I get a thumbs up? I mean, if you have your laptop, okay, right. Um, so to the practical part, I would want us to. Nice, a lot of people will be following. Please, uh, if I lose you along the way, I could always pick you up. So let's open our terminal to create a project or a folder. Sorry, you can decide to create it manually or the terminal. If you decide to use the terminal, can name it anything you want to name it. But I'm just gonna go ahead and um right. If you're using VS Code as your code editor, I mean you could easily just do code plus. That's if you created your folder via the terminal. But I'm not going to be using VS Code. So I'm just going to open just gonna open my project. Here. I'm guessing that we are all done with that, right? So the first command creates a folder for you and then enters into the folder, which is the whole essence of CD. Then the next command, the npm init -i, is meant for initializing your Node.js project, initializing Node. So we're just going to run that. I'm going to close this. We're going to open your terminal in your code editor and type the npm init -y. So what this does basically is it creates your package.json. So the package.json file is majorly used for handling your dependencies. Dependencies are external libraries or tools that you might need for your applications. So you can just import them via your package.json. It's also used for handling scripts. So the script is commands that you can run for your application. Let's say to start your app, to test your app, or any other command that you want to run. Those are your scripts. So it's also used to handle that. So I could create a script here and call it start. And then doing some reason my terminal. Oh, sorry. Let me stop present. Sorry. Let me stop presenting and presenting and present again. Okay. How about now? So this was the command I ran. npm init-y creates this package.json file. Again, what the package.json file does is it handles your dependencies and your script. So in this script, I could create a script called start, and here I'm adding a command to start my project, which is node src/index.js. That's the file part, which I haven't created yet. I mean, this is just a configuration for the Node.js project. So after I've initialized Node.js in a project using this package.json, the next thing I want to do is to install Express, right? Node.js is the first thing that I initialized. The next thing I want to install is Express. So npm install Express. Does anybody know what npm means? Thumbs up, please. Good. I mean, a few people. Okay, so npm is a command line keyword from Node that helps you majorly with dependencies, right? You can use it to install, remove dependencies, basically for managing dependencies. So it's from Node, like I just did, npm install Express. I installed Express, which is a dependency, a tool that I need from application. So basically, that's what npm is used for. I think it comes automatically when Node is installed on your computer. But yeah, I hope I've not lost anybody. But what this npm install Express did, as you can see, it added Express dependency in the package.json file. That's one or the first tool we need for our application. It added the dependencies together with the package.lock and the node modules. These are the node modules, again, dependencies, what you need in your application. You're not going to be editing this. There are default files that will get updated anytime you run npm install, anytime it gets updated. So you're not majorly going to be interacting with that. What you're going to be interacting with most of the time is your package.json file. Moving on, we're getting to the interesting bit of backend. So let's create an Express server, right? Still going back to the code base, I'm going to create a folder. The folder can be anything, but because I already used src in my start command, I could call it any other thing I want to. But majorly people use src. But again, it can be anything. But I'm just going to use src, create an index.js, and then the first thing I want to do to create a server is to first import Express.js. We already installed it in our package.json, so it's already in the application. We just want to import it into this file. So now Express is available in this file. Then want to initialize it. I'm really struggling not to use the auto suggest. And then create a file, a variable called port. The number can be anything again. You can decide to use 8080, 4000, or any other number. And then this is the point where you actually create your server. Please, if you have any question, you could always ask. And then this, we've created our server. So if you want to test that this is actually working, you can just go to your terminal and do npm run. And because you already created a start script here, npm run start. and then you get your console log listening on port 3000. If you can see this play button on your code editor or your IDE, you could easily just do this and then it starts. But if you're working with your terminal, npm run start. Start is because this is the script that we created in our package.json. Any questions? Are we following? Can I get some reactions? You're not lost. Reactions, please. Thank you. So moving on. Thank you. It's one reason. Okay, please go on. Or was that a mistake? If you have any question, you can just go on. That was a mistake. So what is routing in Express? I want us to see, in backend development, one of the most important concepts in to understand is route or routing, right? So think of a route like a road or a path, right? There are many paths. Sometimes on the road you can pass this way or you can pass this way. Basically, so think of a route like that. Think of a route like a road or a path that your users can take when they visit your application or your website, right? So each route is assigned to a particular URL. URL is slash something something slash something something. Anywhere you see slash, that's a URL. Please, you can go on if you have questions.
There is one question in the chat. It says,
Okay.
What are you using to run your code?
What am I using to run my code? Node. I'm not sure. Can you talk or be more descriptive in the chat?
And also, I think there is a one
My
person
code editor.
sound.
Oh, so I'm using WebStorm. Like I mentioned initially, I started writing Java before JavaScript, so I'm used to the whole concept of IntelliJ for Java. So JetBrains IDEs. So I'm using WebStorm. It's a JetBrains IDE for JavaScript. But you could use VS Code. It's similar. I'm just not very familiar with VS Code. So moving on. Think of a route like a road or a path that your users can take when they visit your application or your website. So a route is designed to perform a specific action, like fetching data from the DB or saving data, or updating data. A route is designed to handle a specific action, right? Think of a route like a path. That's just it. So in simple terms, a route defines how your server reacts when someone visits a particular part of your website or sends a request. Let's create a route. Practical. So an example route would be still using app. App is from Express. This is why I mentioned that Express makes Node simpler to write, right? I mean, if you were using Node directly, you would not have these pre-built functions that you can use to create routing. So again, this is one of like the benefits of using Express. I'm going to explain what I'm writing. this is a very busy crowd, right? So I'm going to explain. Should I test it? Let me explain it first. So this app.get with this slash sets the base URL. I mean the paths, like I mentioned, for this particular API, and then the get is the HTTP method. We have a few HTTP methods like get, post, put, patch, delete, but we're using get because this is returning data, right? So get is the HTTP method. It's used for getting stuff from the backend when we are reading. That's when you use get. The request and response is one of it's sort of mandatory for controller functions. It's a function that runs right when a user hits your route, hits your endpoint. It means the request and the response. So at this point, we're not using the request because again, this is a get API. Most of the times, most of the times you don't accept requests for get APIs. Maybe just parameters for searching and filtering, but most of the times you don't accept requests for get requests. So at this point, we're only using the response. So response does send hello world. This is the return. This is what we're sending back to the client. So there are two ways to test this. One way to test this is restart your project, come to your browser, and just do localhost 3000. And then you see hello world, right? Localhost is your laptop IP address replica, right? Basically. So localhost is what you use when you're testing locally. It's general for every local system. This 3000 is the port that was defined here. Again, when you hit on this slash, which was what we defined here, you get to see hello world. Let's create another one to better understand how routing actually works. Slash users, and then the request response, your arrow function, and you want to do rest the send. By this point, we're returning an array of objects. ID 1, first name, sorry, I hope I got that spelling correct. And then you restart your project. The basic way to test get requests, get routes that are not authenticated is usually your browser. So yeah, you just do slash users. Oops. And then this is the response from the backend. This is what we're sending back to the client. So if you actually add like a UI where you're seeing all of your users, this is what the backend is sending to the front end, and then they add a little bit of style and designs, and then display it for you to see. So yeah, this is how routing works. We have two routes. The first is just the slash, which is like the base route, and then the second route is slash users. We could have slash login, slash register, depending on the function or the functions that you're trying to write, or functionalities basically. So moving on, who are middlewares in Express? I won't be able to demonstrate this now until the end of the session when we actually get to build the application. I'm trying to look at time, but it looks like time is running. But yeah, what are middlewares in Express? Middleware functions are helper functions. Not really helper functions, but they. So when you're building backend applications with Express, um, middleware functions are helpers, helpful assistants that sit in the middle of the journey from the request to the response from the server. So they're usually in the middle from the request to the response, from the beginning to the end of an API, right? So they help to process, modify, prepare the request, validations before it actually reaches the end, which is usually like the route and handle it. So an example of a middleware, think about it again, your bank app, right? When you try to send money, the first thing, your first middleware, I mean, if I was designing a send money API, right? The first middleware would be to check that the user is actually authenticated. So it checks for a token. Have you logged in? If you're logged in, it proceeds to the next middleware, which checks for your transaction pin. Is your transaction pin valid? If it's not valid, it breaks at that point. If it's valid, it goes to the next middleware. The next middleware checks for your balance. Do you have sufficient money in your account that you can send out? If you don't, it breaks at that point. If you do, it goes to the next part. So that's the whole essence of middlewares. It's they're helper functions basically. So one of the advantages, so you don't have a bulky function, right? Imagine if you were handling all of that in one function, right? Your send money function, you're checking for transaction pin, you're checking for token, you're checking for balance. It makes it bulky, unreadable, and not good, basically. So one of the advantages of middleware is to avoid bulky functions, to also help or to also avoid replications, right? For example, the check balance. You want to check balance when you're sending money or when you're, let's say, when you're doing wallet to wallet transfer and any other place in the application. Imagine having to write that same code over and over again in your functions or in your controllers, right? But if you have a middleware, all you're doing is you're just calling it in your route. Again, there'll be practical. I'll show you a practical example at the end of the session. So basically, that's what middlewares are used for. They're used to modify request and response, log informations, undo errors, reuse logics, and protect the routes for authentication. So unauthenticated users cannot access a route that's supposed to be protected. Maybe they're sending sensitive data, basically. Controllers. What are controllers in Express? Controllers are think of controllers like as managers that help keep your code clean and organized. So most of the times, due to the fact that you already have middlewares and middlewares and middlewares, what your controller basically does is it just compiles the last response and sends it. You hardly see a controller that handles bulky logic, basically cleans up the response and send it back to the um, client. So what a controller does is it's a manager. It helps keeps your code clean, organized, and easy to understand. So think of a controller like a restaurant. So the route is the waiter. You tell the waiter what you want. The waiter takes your order, right? The controller is the kitchen. The controller prepares the food, chops the ingredients, does everything, decides what to cook, prepare it, right? And then the response is what's being served to your customer, the food, basically. So what the controller does is it receives the order, decides what to cook, how to prepare it, and then sends it back. It doesn't really cook it. It gives it to other the chefs. The chefs are not the controller. The controller is the kitchen. It gives it to the chef to prepare it and then sends the response back to the client. I don't know if that is a wise explanation or yeah, explanation. Basically, a controller is like a manager. Basically, it 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 helps your code organized, clean, and easy to understand, right? So, like my slide says, they receive requests from the routes, decide what to do, like fetching data, returning the message, and they handle what happens when somebody uses your route, uses your app. Moving on, APIs. I mean, this is basically what backend is about 99.9% of the time. Um, Building APIs. So REST stands for representational state transfer. You don't have to really cram it. I forget it sometimes. But REST stands for representational state transfer. Um, just think of REST as a set of simple rules or patterns that developers follow when building APIs, when building their endpoint. These are the things that you actually follow when you're building an API. So a RESTful API is still like the restaurant example that I gave. The front end tells the waiter, which is the API, what they want. And then the waiter takes your request to the kitchen, which is the back end, and then the back end brings back your food to the customer. That's the response. So it's the process of creating your API. Your API, I mean, the front end calls your API, and then the API gets to interact with your controllers, your middlewares, and every other thing, and sends the response back to the client. So there are four actions, right? I call them CRUD or CRUD. Create, which is your post HTTP method. Read, get, update, put, or patch, right? Patch is for partial updates, put is for full update, and then delete for your delete HTTP method. Um, so RESTful APIs, um, they help your front end, they help the client side basically, or even external services. That's if you're building open endpoints that you want others to integrate. They help your front end to talk to your backend clearly and efficiently. It's just like an API or RESTful API is your application saying, ask me what you want to ask me, and I'll give you the answer right away. So it's it's an helper, or it's the middleman between your front end and your back end application, basically. This is the fun part. So in the next few minutes, I'd want us to build a simple application that would cover controllers, middlewares, um, and the APIs, right, that we've theoretically talked about. It's going to be a task manager. So still using the same code base that we started before. Um, let's create a project structure. I like questions. Does anybody have questions before we start? No. No. Okay. So let's create our route. What I'm doing is not compulsory, but I'm just used to organizing files just so it's easy for me to get a particular file. And then we're creating a task manager. So in the route, we'll create a file called tax, the route.js. You can just do tax route.js, whichever one works for you. Same tags. Right now, I'm just creating the files that we need. Controller, the JS. Right. So the starting point would be the controller. Because if I lose you at any point, feel free to drag me back. So due to the fact that time, right, we would not be able to connect the DB and actually interact with the DB because there are other things that are needed, like queries, or if you don't decide to use queries, ORMs, and stuff like that. And due to the fact that it wasn't present in my slides, we would not be going through the DB route. So I'm going to be creating an in-house database, which is like an array, and call it so tags as ID, title, and then status. Right, let's create another one to call this inactive. Let's think of this as our table in the database. We have a tax table in database, and we already have two rows there. And questions, none. So the first thing we want to do in our controller is to create a function for getting all tags. And then res.status 200. First, this is the controller, and then we want to call the controller in our route. So in the routes, all you want to do is to install Express. Express handles everything routing in your backend application. So you're importing Express the same way we did in our index.js, and then import your controller function. So const get all tags from your controllers.tags.controller.js. What we want to do next is to instantiate Express and then router get all tags is a get request. I mean, it's fetching data. So the get, then your URL, your base URL slash, then you call your controller function, get all tags. Basically, what we did initially here was to just return a string using array as the send, but For more complex or bigger applications, doing this is not very scalable. Imagine having 100 routes in just this your index.js. So that's the whole essence of separation. So you have your controller, which is actually returning it, and then your route makes a call to your controller. And then instead of doing this directly, all you have to do is app to use slash API slash tags. First of all, const apologies, this wasn't exported. So module the export, right? And then you import this in your index.js, which is the entry point. So you are importing, let's call it tax router. And then here, you put in your tax router. So I don't know if you have we're following right. Do we have Postman installed, or do I need to walk you through Postman installation? Root. So just 3 people has Postman installed. Okay. Thing is, I don't know what OS you're using, but again, because of time, you could easily just go online and install Postman. I mean, the same way you installed your ID, and make sure it's running perfectly on your laptop, and maybe come back to watch the video to see how I actually did it. So I'm just going to go back to my terminal and restart my application to just check that this is working fine. So we have our first error. Trying to see what route. Okay, I think Morgan. So let's try this again. It is this is it outdoor use. Sorry, this is my bad. I was installing my controller. That was a very silly mistake. Apologies. Can you just imagine? I was trying to look for what the issue was. So yeah, I'm going to open my Postman and you could easily test this on your browser also. I mean, if you go to API/tags, turn it around. Like, you get to see it there, but also on Postman, if you come to localhost, your port number /API/tags, which is your route, and you click on. Always make sure to check this. It's a get request, so you click on send, and then you get to see it. So that's the first route that we implemented. The next one we want to do is create. So let's create our create controller. We have export dot create tags, and then first we want to do like some sort of validation that whatever is coming from the client is what we are actually expecting, and things that are needed are sent. So the first validation we want to do body and body, the title is not available, right? You want to return a message saying message title is required, right? So if body and body the title doesn't exist, show that. But if not, you want to destructure your request of body by doing title and status, and then saving it into this array. And what we're doing is const new tags equals to create an object. ID is tags the length. Oh my god! So tags. I'm just gonna type tags the length plus 1, right? just so it's incrementing this. This is 1, this is 2. So the next one that we're adding will be 3. So that's the length plus 1, and then the title, and then status, right? And then tags, the push new tags, and then want to return the status new tags. So the same way, but to just break this down clearly, this first part is the structuring body from requests, and then we're doing a check if body does not exist and body.title is not in the request. You want to send an error message to the client saying the title is required. A title is required for you to create a task. Well, if the title exists, it comes here and adds this new task to this array. So go to your routes, and then because we are creating, it's going to be a post. Create tags and then run it. Don't forget to change this post. So if you try to send this breaks because it's not reading this. So you get a message called title is required because it's not seeing request or body, and neither are we sending the title. So if you send the title and call it tax 3 status active, and then click on send, we create it. So when you try to get all tags, instead of getting just 2, you get 3 because you just added 1 to it. The next one that we'll be creating is an update tax status. So you want to update the tax status from inactive to active, or maybe active to completed if you are done with the tax. I think we should just put completed here instead of inactive. So let's create an. Are you guys still with me? Okay. So the next one I want to create is export the update tags. And again, what we're doing is destructuring body from request. In case you don't understand what destructuring means, is we are basically just getting whatever is in that object. So we're getting body from request. That's what I mean by destructuring. We're getting, so it's I know this is not a JavaScript workshop, but it's similar to you doing const body equals request of body, right? It's sort of the same thing. So you actually just the structure in JavaScript. After the structuring, again, want to validate that you're sending the body and the status, since you're just updating the status. So if body and status is not there, you want to throw a message called, sorry about my autocomplete. Status is required. So if you're not sending the status when you're updating a task, it throws an error saying status is required. But if you're sending the status, what you just need to do is fetch the tags. But the thing is, what are you fetching the tags with? We need the ID of the tags that you're updating, right? Because how does the backend know what to update if you're just sending the status? So we need like the ID or unique identifier for that particular tags that you're updating. In our code, we're using the ID, which is the unique identifier. So you just need to get the ID from the param. I mean, that's the conventional way. But if you want to add it to the body, that's fine. But I'm going to be using the params here. So I'm going to be getting the ID from the param doing const ID equals request.param.id. I'm going to show you where you actually get to set the param when you're calling the API. So now you can now do tags.find tags your R function. So if tags.id is equals to the ID that you sent, it returns the tags. So if the tags does not exist, you return an error message saying rest.status 404 just send tags not found. So if the tags does not exist, it means that the ID that was sent back does not actually exist in your database. So you're telling them that this tags was not found. Next, if that passes, you want to update the status by saying tags.status equals to completed, and then return rest.status. Again, to just reiterate, this gets the body from the request. Body is whatever we get to send here. Gets the body from the request, gets the ID from the param, checks that the body actually is being sent and there's status there. If the status is not there, it returns an error message. Status required. It's just a validation, a request validation, which is what backend handles, like I mentioned initially. Then it checks that the tags actually exist in a DB by finding. If the tag doesn't exist, it returns this message, tags not found. If it's found, it updates the status and returns a success message. So I'm going to create a route for updates. This is an update method, so a partial update, so we should use patch, right? Get is for reading, post is for creating, patch is for partial update. So here we're doing this, and in your path, this is where the params comes in. This is how you define the params ID. So it has to match with whatever you're trying to get here. Sorry, here. So if I put ID here and I'm now putting tax ID here, it's going to flag it because it has to be exactly the same thing they are defining in the route. And then update tax. Right, and let's test this. And then you're putting your ID to, you're updating this to patch, and then you're sending. So you get an error message called saying status is required, which means you're supposed to send status in the request or body. So I'm going to put status. Wait, I feel like I made a mistake. Yeah, this is the mistake. Yeah. So I'm going to just restart this. And then status. So if you get all tags, before task 2 was inactive. So if you get it now, you get completed. The reason why you're not seeing task 3 is because I've restarted the server, which means it cleared previous data. I mean, that's one of the downside of not using a stable database like Postgres or MongoDB. But yeah, that's why you're not seeing task 3 again. That's if you pass an ID that doesn't exist, you get tax not found. So the last route that we'll be creating is delete. Just so we complete like the CRUD. So we've done C R U CRUD is remaining the day. So let's create a delete controller just so we know like the tags that we're trying to delete. We need the ID again from the parameter from the parameter, and then you find stacks equals stacks dot find get one tags your function if tags dot id is equals to the id that has been sent, right? If the tags does not exist, you return the same message, tags not found. But if the tags exists, you want to do tags dot tags equals to tags dot filter get a single tags arrow function tags the id is not equals to id. So this is what actually removes the tags that you want to delete. So what this is doing is you are recreating this tags array, right? You're recreating it with the tags that's not this ID, which is like this negation sign that I'm doing. So then return this and put a message saying tags deleted successfully. Right. And then we'll come here, router dot delete. You put your param, which is the ID that is required, and then import this, delete tags, delete tags. Right. You restart this, create a request, call it delete tags. First, let's create one tag. So let's just delete 2. Change this to delete and click on this tags deleted successfully. So if you try to get all tags, you get just one, right? Because we deleted the one with ID 2. So that's that about controllers. So controllers, this this is your route. So the last point I want to touch is the middleware. I'm not going to be doing much in the middleware. I'm just going to be creating a log middleware. I think what you could do when we're done with this session is to try to separate all of these. For example, now we can see tax not found in two of these controller functions. But imagine if you had a middleware function that you could easily just call in your routes and then take out this part of your code, right? It eliminates duplicate code, and makes your controller cleaner and easier to read. But I'm just going to be creating a log middleware and call it so it's accepting the request response and next. I'm going to be explaining this shortly. So backtick. You want to do $, and you're doing new no dates dot to our string, and then another $, where are you? $, request dot method no first the method and request to URL and then next. So the essence of this next is you are telling your middleware to go to the next function to run, which I would show you. Right. So in your route, you cannot import your logger or add your logger. First import logger, logger, middle dot slash middlewares slash .js. Right. So here you can add your logger. And here you can add your logger. Let's test this. Right, so let's try to update tags again. Update tags to click send. So it logged whatever was supposed to log, and then this next took it to the next function, which is the controller. So if I remove this next and run this, it keeps running because at this point it breaks. It doesn't know what else to do. What's the next thing to do? And it keeps running. But with the next, it actually tells your application or the routes that, when you're done with this middleware, go to your controller and run what's supposed to be run. So it logs it and then goes to your controller and completes whatever is supposed to be completed. I don't know if everybody followed. Thanks for the thumbs up. But yeah, that's all for the play around with controllers, middlewares, routes, Express and Node. As you can see, it's very interesting and I guess simpler than front end. Very. to wrap up, I would love to talk about. I mean, when you start building bigger applications, or when you start working with teams, you'd need to put this in mind for your code base. So, best practices for backend development ensure to always use a modular structure. I mean, not always, but ensure to make sure that your code is organized, right? It could be it could be this way that I did mine, controllers, middleware, and routes, or it could be modules, right? You can create a module like users, and then inside your user folder you have controller, middleware, route. You create another module called applications and do create your routes, controller, and everything. So just ensure that everything is organized and easy to find basically. Also clean and readable code. Ensure that your method names, your variable names are easy to understand. I mean, right now, if somebody comes to this code base and sees my function name, you could easily, without reading the function, understand what the function is about. Oh, this function is updating a task. This function is creating a task. But avoid things like DT as a function name or UT as a function name. They are really not able to understand basically. Also ENVs. I wasn't really able to use ENVs here, but for stuffs like your port and your index.js, you could easily create a .env file, put your port, and then just import it using processor env in your project and stuff like that. There are other best practice for backend development, but in summary, I mean these are like the major ones that you need to adhere to for a clean code base, basically. Um, so yeah, that's it. That's all. Um, questions? Thank you.
So
Okay.
a huge thank you to Ife for delivering us such a wonderful and insightful backend workshop. We truly appreciate the time, knowledge, and energy you shared with us. And I'm sure backend is not as mysterious as it was to most of us when we
Even.
started this workshop. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Even.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Aida is raising her hand.
Hello, Ife.
Hi.
So I have a question. So I'm a front-end developer, and most of the time, I know the basics of backend. And as I say, most of the time, people say like developers say that backend is harder than front-end, like way harder. But as far as I know, like for me, it is easier. So I want to know which part of backend is complex. Like why why is it complex? Because as I said, as far as I know, it's way easier than for me, but I only know the basics. Thank you.
I actually agree with you. I mean, I think front end is harder than back end. I think back end is very straightforward and actually easier to comprehend. Um, I don't think there's any hard parts in backend development. It's basically just logic, right? And most of the things that you're doing on the backend is related to tools and libraries that are using or logic or DSAs, interacting with database, writing queries. Unlike front end where you have to struggle with CSS and HTML, and you still have to like write logic sometimes. So again, I agree with you. I think front end is harder than back end. Back end is straightforward, right? You just need to understand the concept. If you want to use Express, understand what Express is about, the basic things about Express, and then you're good to go. If you want to use Java, understand Java and Spring Boot, you're good to go. It's actually very straightforward. I don't think there's any hard parts in backend. It's sweeter than front end. No
Thank you
bias.
so much. Many developers needed to hear this, to be honest. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other question? Take that as a no. Okay, I think really that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much to everyone that stayed from the beginning of the session to the end. Thank you for listening to my rants and explanations. I really hope that you continue on the backend journey. As we've seen, backend is nice. It's fun. It's fun to do. So I really hope that we continue. Don't give up on backend. Become pros, basically. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'll hand it over back to the host. Okay.
It's okay, you can go ahead.
No. I was going to hand the session back to the host for you to continue.
Okay, thank you so much. We had an amazing session with you. Thank you very much. And Aidan, I'll give the closing for Aidan. It's your floor.
So you're muted.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I was saying thank you very much, Ife. We have really learned a lot, and I'm sure we will take this knowledge and build something bigger with it. Thank you very much. So, we can let you go now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Right. Okay. And the rest of you guys, you have to fill your attendances. So I'll share the link in the description.